Dusk is a first-person shooter fashioned after olden-time classics like Doom, Quake, and Blood, going so far as to emulate its same blistering fast gameplay and low-poly visual style. It was developed over several years by one mad lad, David Sheminski, and then was published by New Blood Interactive, being released in December of 2018. Following its inspiration of 90s shooters, it's a little light when it comes to story, but it basically revolves around the town of Dusk, where a bunch of Lovecraftian ruins have been dug up under some old farmland. So, of course, the locals do the most logical thing in this situation, and become full-time cultists, because why not? Inevitably, this draws the attention of the player character, who's some unnamed treasure hunter looking for some fat loot. It's then your task to fend off baddies and troves with all manner of weapons, whilst you bunny hop around looking for switches to flip and trying to figure out where to go and what's going on. It's just the hook to frame the game upon, really, and it's not all that important, so it does it well enough for what it is. The attention's been fully devoted to where it really matters, and that's the gameplay, since it sponsors fast movement and high mobility that encourages you to jump around the map like an absolute speed demon while you dispose of countless enemies trying to saw your face off. You find the usual suspects when it comes to weapons, like the super shotgun or the hunting rifle, while others have a small twist for added flavor, whether it's still wielding shotguns and pistols, or having a crossbow that shoots what looks like bolts made out of tiberium that can pierce through literally anything and everything. They perform about as well as one could hope for, with shotguns being appropriate of disposing of enemies that get up too close within 1 to 3 blasts each, whilst the Riveter, which is the rocket launcher equivalent, is capable of rendering just about anything to chicken nuggets within a few moments' notice. They feel generally pretty responsive and fun to use, with you being incentivized to swap out to better suit the situation, whether it's dealing with melee people up close or enemies from afar peppering you with projectiles. Besides these ranged weapons, there's also a sword that you can find that's a pretty worthy upgrade to the sickles. It has a longer reach, greater damage, and the ability to charge it up for an even more powerful attack whenever you have full health. Plus, you can also use a point of your morale, which is your armor value, whenever it's over 50 to deflect attacks and projectiles, which can be pretty invaluable, especially on the level that it's properly introduced on. The only real exception when it comes to weapons slid in the side down would probably be the assault rifle feeling a bit naff against anything other than the more basic enemies. I only ever really used it to thin out the hordes of weaker monsters, or if I wanted to snipe someone from across the map and I was feeling stingy with my hunting rifle ammo. Besides that though, the choice of weapons is so plentiful that you'll find one to suit your needs on the fly while you're zipping around in firefights. So really it's mostly hits and rarely misses when it comes to slaying dudes. Another thing that Dusk excels at has to be the mobility. It has super fast movement, and this is only bolstered by the ability to bunny hop around, so you can end up going at Mach 1 and speed through entire levels at a time, all the while strafing even faster around enemies. Getting this and the shooting down right is crucial for any Twitch shooter, and here it's so responsive that it just feels great and is a joy to play. You'll always feel in control and have the ability to mitigate damage from constantly moving and jumping around, which is only encouraged all the more as the game progresses, since more and more enemies will start showing up at a time, which will all but require you to do so in order to avoid getting insta-melted. You can also power slide, which is pretty awesome in of itself, but it also serves a practical use since you can hopefully avoid projectiles using it. The selection of enemies you'll encounter is pretty diverse, with the usual token horror tropes making an appearance as you'd expect, like cult members and satanic goats, as well as Al Borland, who's gone serial killer, and they're all appropriately placed to fit in with the theme of each level. Other stronger enemies are slowly introduced as the scenery starts changing from rural farmland to urban town and so on. I also liked the scarecrows that they had lying around in the farmlands in the early levels, who were all well and good with me passing by, up until they came to life and made me jump in surprise the first time they stopped playing dead. Then later on the military gets involved and things just go from bad to worse as harder hitting enemies start joining in, whether it's AoE flame-throwing welders or the rocket launching cowgirls trying to spam you into the ground. Thankfully, the time to kill on most things isn't too high, so provided you're equipped with the right weapons at the time, you can usually whittle their numbers down at a reasonable pace. And fortunately, there's no hit scan enemies either, so you don't have to worry about some bugger from across the map chipping away your health without any means of retaliating, which I really do appreciate. Another thing that Dusk has taken from retro FPS games is monster infighting, so sometimes you can get enemies attacking one another, which will free you up to focus on the bigger threats. Some of the opponents you'll come across are a bit bizarre or downright creepy. My favorite has to be the Wendigos, who are invisible weird-ass humanoid-shaped deer demons that run around on all fours. The first couple of times you encounter them are pretty memorable, if only because they're chasing after you in the dark, or you hear them push something out of the way, so you know they're coming after your booty. They also let out a pretty startling cry whenever you hit one to reveal it, so they ended up making me jump now and then from the surprise of discovering one. Plus, they've got a pretty neat design, and they're on the cover of the game, okay? There's over a dozen bosses included, some of which are just recycled or resized regular mobs, but there are some unique ones that stand out. Like the giant crocs that spit out acid, or the big military bloke that's most definitely not Alan Dutch. And they're usually a pretty decent challenge, although that's only when you don't have a riveter, which you then blow them away within mere seconds. Or if you have a bar of soap, since you can throw physic objects with inhuman strength, which usually results in one-shotting regular enemies. Or you can use the double attack speed power-up, which, speaking of, there's a couple of different power-ups to use scattered throughout the game. Whether it's the aforementioned fast fire totem, which turns out that it actually stacks with itself, so you can turn even your double pistols into an absolute minigun of murder. Then there's the serums of blistering heat, which lets you pretend that you're playing super hot by slowing down time whenever you're not moving. So this lets you better avoid attacks and line up your shots during the more hectic moments, of which there's a fair few, so it can be quite useful. Otherwise, there's the climbing thing, which as the name implies, lets you climb just about anything and provides sweet Spider-Man jumps while you're at it. These are a little bit different in that they usually respawn, since all the power-ups have a set amount of time that they can be used, and these are sometimes required to actually finish a level, so it's a good thing that the developer player-proofed the maps. Speaking of maps, the game comes with 3 episodes structured with 10 levels each, along with a couple of bonus ones thrown in with the plethora of other secrets strewn throughout each map. Seriously, some of these can get downright cryptic to find at times. In any case, the levels themselves are usually fairly short, averaging about 5 minutes each, with maybe a little bit more if there's some platforming or boss fights involved. This can be somewhat extended if you go out of your way to look for every secret, or if you have a tendency to get lost on some of the more complex maps, like I did on a couple of occasions. This could be either because of the claustrophobic nature of some levels, like the mine during the first episode, or from needing to backtrack to an earlier stage, or it could just be that locked door near the start of the level that you completely forgot about after shooting blokes and flipping switches for the last 10 minutes. The pacing of levels for the most part is pretty good, and the environments do become somewhat varied as you progress through the different areas surrounding the town of Dusk, trudging through farmlands, cathedrals, and factories until you reach the third act and things become decidedly more Quake-like in terms of design and flow. If you just want to mindlessly shoot people and not have to worry about pesky objectives, you can try out Endless Mode, which is exactly what it sounds like. You pick a map, select your difficulty, and blow away waves of respawning enemies until you either die or get bored. Which isn't the worst way to play if you've only got limited time on your hand. There's also a bunch of accolades to collect for each campaign level, including beating it within the par time, finding all the secrets and killing every enemy on the map, or not killing anyone at all, and so on. There's also some incentive to go back and replay it again if you want to tackle it in a different way, and the level selection option helps with that too, since it gives you the option to adjust your loadout for every level. So if you just want to mess around and have basically every weapon unlocked from the get-go, you can. Although on a first playthrough, I'd almost feel that it would end up cheapening the experience if you do find certain secrets, since it can end up rewarding you with some pretty powerful weapons before any of the tougher enemy types show up, meaning you'll just end up mowing everyone else down with ease, which isn't necessarily bad, but it can still kind of deflate some of the tension that the earlier missions have. Some missions in Act 2 can feel like they drag on a bit at times, and each time a long fall broke my flashlight and had me running around in the dark to play like it's something out of Doom 3 had me rolling my eyes after the second or third time it happened. There's not even any fall damage in Dusk, so is all the inertia just kept in my flashlight? Fortunately, these sections are fairly short, so they're at least tolerable, and besides this, Dusk also develops a fondness for ambushing the player with tough enemies that can melt you instantly. It's by no means all bad though, since this is also around the time that they start introducing some of the more interesting sequences and enemy types. Plus, it has what might be my favorite level, the Erebus Reactor. It's essentially just one giant fighting arena with a lot of hazards and jump pads included, letting you fly around and gun down enemies scattered all over the place with a whole lot of verticality to it. Plus, the music that plays throughout the level is also competing to be one of my favorite from the whole soundtrack. Which, speaking of, is just downright incredible, with Andrew Hochschild doing a fantastic job at capturing the feel of retro FPS metal. It's being used to great effect here, usually matching the intensity of combat and just being genuinely enjoyable to listen to. It also helps set the atmosphere in some of those slower, creepier moments as well. All in all, it gels together to make a complete experience that complements one another really well, to the point that I actually went back and bought the Intruder Edition upgrade just because I wanted to get the soundtrack. I pretty much never do that, so that in of itself pretty much says it all, really. The only other complaints that I can think of has to first be how finicky the ladders are, since once you're attached to one, you can't reorientate yourself side to side, so you'll sometimes find yourself hitting your head against the ceiling like a bellend until you jump off to correct yourself. Then the other one comes down to the difficulty settings, which there's 5 to choose from, ranging from Put Me to Sleep mode, which is accessible, up to Duskmare, where you simply die outright if you suffer any damage whatsoever. I started out on normal, and I still found it way too easy, with the only death throughout the first episode being just because I didn't expect 2 boss fights in a row towards the end. The game displays a warning whenever you pick Zero Medio not being appropriate for first time playthroughs, but I have to say that I completely disagree with that. What is essentially hard mode feels exactly how the intended difficulty for the game was even designed around, and I would have to say I definitely recommend starting out on that and then downgrading if you found the first episode to be too difficult, since the challenge does steadily increase as you progress. I definitely appreciate just how much customization you can do regarding the game's presentation as well. It has the option of making it more pixelated or increase the smoke effects to be more blocky and to really get that authentic 90s feel, or you could change the color palette to one of the different presets. Hell, you can even make your own, like I did with Vapor Dusk Wave. Nice! Then there's the fact that since everything is so low polycat, that the game runs without issue even when there's even a ridiculous amount of enemies and projectiles flying on screen. Which is good, since Dusk certainly doesn't get shy about shoving you against dozens and dozens of enemies at the same time later on either. I don't recall suffering a single bug throughout my entire playthrough either, so I have to say that I'm really rather pleased with how it performed. And while it's influenced by the likes of Quake, Redneck Rampage, and Blood, it comes off as an inspiration and never an imitation, so it very much feels like its own unique thing. And it's done a fantastic job at recapturing the essence of what made 90s shooters. Originally, I never really gave this game much consideration back when I first saw the trailer for it around the time it was being released. I kind of just dismissed it for about 6 months until I gave it another look and decided to give it a try. And I'm really glad that I did, since it turned out to actually be one of the better shooters that I've played in years, and as a result, I can't recommend it enough. Subsequent playthroughs will probably average about an hour per episode once you learn the layout of each map, but the first time through the campaign will probably take you around 6 to 8 hours to complete. So while it's a little bit on the short side, it's absolutely required playing for old and new FPS fans alike. And while the game may be centered around Lovecraftian cults, those who don't play Dusk are the real heretics.